Why does the USA keep targeting Mexicans? Well, it's not at random. And it's not new. From pretty much the beginning, Mexicans have been painted as the villains. And through it all, there's been only one reason driving this entire system to be this way. By the end of this video, you'll see the truth that no one involved ever wants you to see. And why this war on Mexicans should have never began in the first place. First, we need to start with the deep roots of racism. America's story with Mexicans didn't start at the border wall. It started way back in the 1800s, when the US took half of Mexico's land during the Mexican and American War. Overnight, Mexican families who were Mexican one day, the next became foreigners, even though they didn't move an inch. That set the tone. Mexicans weren't treated as neighbors in the USA. They were treated like outsiders in their own homes, where they lived forever, for generations, for centuries. By the late 1800s and 1900s, Mexicans were pushed into the worst jobs and paid a lot less than the white workers. In Texas, whole towns banned Mexican kids from going to school. And even restaurants even went as far as putting up signs saying, "No dogs, no Mexicans." If this sounds extreme, remember that this was the same country that was putting up whites-only water fountains. Mexicans got lumped into the same second-class treatment as black people and other non-whites. This racism went much farther than signs though. There were lynchings across the Southwest where mobs killed Mexicans in public. And some historians even call it the forgotten genocide. The stories got buried back then till this day, but the culture of full hate and lies, they just stuck. To this day, Mexicans are still cast as the problem. On TV, movies, and even popular politicians say this, and people even believe it still. Think about it. When people in the 1980s were worried about drugs, who got painted as the face of it? Not the Wall Street bankers. And we all know what they were doing in bathrooms and fancy bars back then. But no matter what, it was the Mexicans at the border that were the problem. Politicians had no problem pointing fingers to the South. And they did it because it worked. They knew it would because it was from the same old playbook that has been going on for generations. This deep history of racism shaped laws, schools, neighborhoods, all across the USA. And once you set up a group as a villain, it's easy to target them again and again. That's the deep roots of why Mexicans became the face of immigration raids, prison sweeps, and border crackdown. Now let's talk about the historic labor demand. Here's the part that nobody likes to admit. The USA has always wanted Mexican labor because it was cheap, it was fast, and it was really easily replaced. When there were tracks for trains to lay in the 1800s, Mexicans were brought in. When farms needed workers during World War II, the US launched Barcelo program in 1942. I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but there was a program. This program pulled in millions of Mexican men to work the fields, keep crops moving, and make sure that America's food supply didn't run dry. It sounds like Mexicans over the years have really helped a lot. And it sounds like a win-win, right? Except when that program ended in 1964, the demand didn't stop. Farmers still wanted the same labor for the same price. Construction still needed workers. And hotels and restaurants still leaned on that workforce too. So Mexicans, they kept coming. The US didn't stop using their labor. They didn't want to stop. They were addicted to it. But what they did was slap this label on Mexican people that were in the US. That label is the illegal label. And it was like a switch. One day Mexican workers were guests, and the next day they were criminals. It was like same hands, same work, but they all had a different title. This is why so many older people in the US remember growing up around Mexican workers in the fields, kitchens, or on construction sites. They weren't hiding in the shadows or running from ICE. They were visible. They were working hard and doing most jobs that Americans refused to touch. And yet politicians kept opening their big mouths and saying that these workers were a threat to jobs, a threat to wages, and a threat to the country itself, a national security threat. But the truth, they were holding up entire industries. If there was no Mexican labor, then there's no crops on your table, no new homes getting built, and no cheap hotel rooms for that vacation that you want to take. This is the contradiction that built the whole immigration game. The US depends on Mexican labor while pushing away the very same people it relies on. And that same contradiction is still running till today, fueling a system that flips reality upside down. It's completely backwards from how it should be and far from what's actually right. The US built its own cycle. Invite the Mexicans when you need them and criminalize them when it's convenient. And that cycle leads straight into targeting. This brings me to my next reason: stereotyping and racial profile. Once Americans painted Mexicans as illegals, The next step was super easy. Turn that image into a stereotype. And that stereotype got baked into every single thing. The news, movies, and even jokes that people tell at work. Mexicans became the go-to face of illegal immigration. Even though immigrants come from all over the world, this is what they were painted as. Think about airport security. If your name is Smith and you got a sunburn from Cancun, you're waved through. But if your name is Hernandez, suddenly you're randomly selected. That's not random, it's racial profiling. ICE and local cops built this whole system around this. There were traffic stops where people get asked for papers, raids at factories where every worker who looks Mexican gets lined up, and school kids hearing slurs from teachers that should have known better. That stereotype gives a cover to all of it. This isn't new. Back in the 80s and 90s, Hollywood has its hand in this mess too. Every action flick had the same type of villain. A Mexican drug runner with a mustache driving a beat up truck. Just turn on Miami Vice reruns and you'll see it in plain day. And what happened was that image sank deep into the culture. So when politicians shouted about bad hombres, it felt believable. And it felt believable because these people, like everyone, already had the stereotype in their head. And stereotypes make it much easier for law enforcement. Instead of looking at real data, tracking real threats, ICE leans on appearance. I mean, who looks Mexican, who sounds Mexican, those are the ones who get stopped first. It's just straight up lazy policing. And it's straight up lazy policing disguised as national security. The wild part, this stereotype is so strong that even US citizens get caught in it. There are a ton of real stories about people born in Texas or California being detained and sent back to Mexico because they look illegal. So when we talk about Mexicans being targeted, it's not about law and order or about making things safer. It's about an image that was built and sold and then enforced. This is an image so powerful that it puts millions of people under suspicion at any given time without any proof whatsoever. Now, I didn't grow up in the USA, but I know that's not the type of place that they promote themselves to be. This brings us into the media narratives. If stereotypes are the seed, the media is the water. For decades, TV and newspapers have fed the US population the same storyline, that Mexicans equal crime, drugs, and danger. Flip through the channels in the 80s and 90s, and it was non-stop fear. News anchors with serious voices warned about illegal aliens flooding into the border. Sounds familiar? While footage of dusty crossings rolled in the background as the stage of a crime drama, like it was some sort of crime drama. Politicians loved this script. No matter what side of the aisle they were on, a lot of them used this idea. And Hollywood backed it up too. Movies tossed in Mexican character drug dealers, gang members, or comic reliefs. Rarely heroes, rarely leaders, rarely normal people with jobs and families. By the time the 90s hit, this media loop has done its job. To the average viewer, Mexicans weren't neighbors. They were the issue. And once that narrative stuck, it didn't matter what the truth was. The statistics could show that immigrants commit fewer crimes than US citizens. But that didn't matter to anybody really. The TV said otherwise. So of course they had to be right. And when the show Cops ran episodes showing raids in Latino neighborhoods, that ran deeper than any data chart could. A headline about hardworking farmhands won't grab views like a headline about drug mules at the border. And everything in America became this, everything needs to be sold as a tabloid gossip. Drama first and the truth maybe last, if they had to tell the truth. This cycle trained the public to see Mexicans as a threat before they even met one in real life. By the time ICE grew into a giant force, the audience was already primed. Most people didn't question raids because that story has been drilled into their heads for years. So the media didn't just report the news, it wrote a script. And this script made targeting look normal. And once people actually bought the story, the system had free reign to just keep running it. Now let's get into convenience and visibility. Targeting Mexicans isn't only about history or media. It's also about convenience. Mexicans are the largest immigrant group in the USA, with a population of over 37 million in the USA. As I speak, that means if the government wants to show results on immigration, Mexicans are the easiest group to target. They're the easiest group to point at. And ultimately, more numbers equal more arrests, which equals more detainees and deportations. It's like fishing in a stocked pond. The border itself makes things even simpler. Mexico is right there, sharing close to 2,000 miles of land with the USA. And if someone's detained, ICE doesn't need to arrange a long flight to another continent. They can put people on a bus, and drive them across the border and call it successful. It's quick, it's cheap, and it's efficient. Compare that to deporting someone to China or Nigeria, where the paperwork, flights, and costs pile up. Mexicans are basically the low hanging fruit for lazy law enforcement and greed. This convenience isn't just some small detail that is a coincidence. It shapes entire policies in the US. Fast track deportation agreements with Mexico lets ICE process a huge number of people in record time. No other immigrant group can be targeted at this scale. It's like fast food, mass production, quick services, and maximum output. And the system just eats it all up. This system that we call democracy. Communities in border states feel this more than anywhere else. Families in Texas, Arizona, and California know that the local sheriffs often team up with ICE, running these traffic stops and raids that hit Mexicans the hardest. It's not because they're more illegal, it's because they're nearby, visible, and easy to grab. So when we ask why Mexicans are getting targeted more than others, part of this answer is just simple math. They're the biggest group, the closest group, and the most visible group. That makes them the most convenient target for a system that benefits from numbers and headlines. Let me explain a little bit about legacy of Operation Wetback. In the 1950s, the US launched one of the biggest mass deportations ever. This name, though, it tells you how ugly it really was. Operation Wetback? Are you kidding me? This goal for this horrible operation was simple. Sweep up Mexicans and ship them out, ship them south, get rid of them. By the time it ended in 1954, more than 1 million Mexicans were deported from the USA. And here's the kicker. Thousands of them were born there. They were citizens, carrying papers, speaking English. But it didn't matter to Americans. If you looked Mexican, you were targeted. Same old story. This operation set the playbook for what came next. Armies of agents riding through neighborhoods, rounding up farm workers, loading buses, and calling it law enforcement. Sounds familiar? The same system that ICE uses today. It's just that ICE has better technology and bigger budgets. The stories from that era are brutal. Families were split overnight. Workers were dumped into some random town with no money and no place to call home. There's also stories about some deportees that were dropped in the desert without food or water. Can you imagine this? And the thing is too, is that similar things to this are even happening today. Operation Wetback burned the idea into the minds of US population that Mexicans were the natural target for deportations, for mass deportation. Politicians brag about the numbers, but not the numbers of lives destroyed, but the numbers of people they round up, locked up, and shipped out. The operation made Mexicans the default immigrant in the eyes of law enforcement. If you're looking to crack down, you don't even ask who's illegal. You sweep first and then sort the problems out later. The shadow of that operation still lingers to today. Decades later, when politicians push for raids, walls, or tougher enforcement, they're not inventing anything new. They're recycling an old script. So when people wonder why ICE is so aggressive with Mexicans, the answer goes back more than 70 years. The system was built on a mass deportation experiment that never really ended. It's still going on, and it probably will still go on in the future. Just super sad. Now let's talk about political scapegoating. Every election season, there's a lot of politicians that pull out the same playbook to blame Mexicans. That's the playbook, simple. Do you need to distract from a bad economy? Point at the border. Need to fire up or rally a crowd? Shout, illegals are stealing our jobs. Need funding for more police? Somehow tie it to Mexico. It's that easy. It's one of Washington's oldest tricks. Back in the 1980s, Reagan talked, though, on immigration to sell himself as the law and order president. In the 90s, Clinton pushed mass deportations to prove that Democrats could be tough too. And by the 2000s, Bush was running ads warning about porous borders, that there's holes in the borders and people are getting through, basically. Then came Trump, calling Mexicans criminals and bad hombres. Different decades, different faces, different presidents, but the same problem, the same scapegoat. Because they're visible. They're the biggest group. And the media already primed the public to see them as the problem. For a politician, it's low risk and really high reward. You get these applause and claps for sounding super tough. And you don't need to explain the real reason jobs are disappearing, like outsourcing, automation, or greedy corporations and government printing of money. Blaming Mexicans is just way simpler. And people like to understand simple problems. They don't like complicated ones. But why Mexicans? This tactic isn't new. In the 70s, politicians were already warning about waves of Mexicans. The words changed over time, But the playbook was the same. Use fear of Mexicans to win votes. And it worked. Polls show immigration spikes as the top concern on every election cycle. Wild. Even when actual immigration numbers are down. Why? Because fear is pumped through speeches, debates, and headlines until it feels like a real crisis. Mexicans become the face of every problem, whether it's drugs, crime, or unemployment. Seems like they're just stacking things over time to blame them for everything. Eventually, the US doesn't want to blame themselves for their own problems. So if you notice that Mexicans are popping up in every political debate, that's not a coincidence. It's a real strategy. And this strategy has been running for decades. It's like an endless campaign commercial that just goes on repeat forever and ever. Now we need to talk about economic inequality. One of the biggest reasons Mexicans get targeted is also the most practical. A lot of them in the US are stuck unwillingly at the bottom of the economic ladder. Low wages, hard labor, and no safety net. That makes them both essential and exploitable. And undocumented workers are a dream for shady bosses. They can pay them less than minimum wage, skip health benefits, and threaten deportation if anyone complains. Just imagine working 12-hour shifts in the field and it's backbreaking. And your boss says to you, you don't like it? Then I'll call ICE and they'll come get you. That's the truth for some people. This system traps them in a prison of silence and suffering. This isn't by accident. Industries from farming to construction to restaurants rely on the imbalance to survive. The economy saves billions by underpaying Mexicans. That's why you can buy strawberries in December for a few bucks or get your house remodeled for a fraction of the cost. It's just straight up exploitation, and it runs deeper than wages. Many Mexicans live in neighborhoods with underfunded schools, few jobs, and few opportunities. Let's not forget consistent police presence. They're boxed into the system that profits off cheap labor and punishes them for being illegal. It's actually a setup that keeps them from being able to climb out of it, traps them in there. And yet, whenever wages stagnate or jobs vanish, politicians blame Mexicans, not themselves. Not the real problem. Not that the companies ship factories overseas. Not that the CEOs are pocketing record profits and bonuses. Mexicans become a scapegoat, even while being the backbone of many industries. So the inequality isn't random. It's wired into the system. It rewards those who exploit people with fewer opportunities and security than the rest of us. And Mexicans are kept in this position where they can be used and abused, and overall blamed for all the problems. That imbalance feeds the cycle of targeting and keeping power in the hands of those who benefit the most. Now, we can't talk about any of this without talking about the prison pipeline. If there's one place that the U.S.A.'s targeting is crystal clear, it's the prison system. Now, Latinos, mostly made of Mexicans, make up the largest group in federal prisons in the USA. And prisons today aren't just about crime. Don't kid yourself. They're a massive profit machine. Massive. Every locked up body turns into money for huge corporations that make profits off this. Private prison companies like GEO Group and Core Civic rake in billions from immigrant detention centers. The government signs contracts that guarantee beds will stay full with these places. That means there's a huge financial incentive to arrest and detain as many people as possible. I don't see how some people don't see how this is totally wrong. The more Mexicans ICE and the police scoop up, the more cash flows into these corporations' pockets. It's like a hotel business, except guests can't just pack up and leave whenever they want to. And guess who picks up the bill for these places? That's right, taxpayers. The setup is brutal. Families split apart, parents taken from kids, people locked up in cells for months without charges, and yet shareholders profit and cheer because they're making record profits every single year. This is capitalism wired to human suffering. The prison pipeline also extends into local economies. Towns with declining industries welcome detention centers as job creators. And I don't blame them when they're suffering and they need money. Whatever opportunity comes usually, people stick to that, right? In places where factories closed or malls emptied out, prisons became the new business and Mexicans became the new raw material. It's as if entire towns started rooting for more arrests just to pay their bills. Think back to the 80s and 90s when America panicked about drugs. Politicians passed tough crime laws that ballooned prison population massively. Mexicans were caught in that net, labeled as both drug dealers and illegals. It didn't matter if the charges were minor. Locking people up was the whole point. That era turned prisons into a booming industry and Mexicans into one of the biggest targets. Even today, ICE detention centers outnumber Starbucks in some states. That blows my mind. That's not by chance though. It's by design. The entire system built an entire economy on the backs of immigrants and Mexicans. And these groups became the most profitable to lock up. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room that no one really wants to talk about or understand: the profit engine. Here's the truth that all other points in this video point to. Mexicans are targeted because it makes a lot of money. The system runs on profit. It's the only reason that the USA does anything these days. It's a corporation. It's run like a corporation, and everybody wants to make profit, no matter if it's for good or evil, unfortunately. And the thing is that immigrants are the fuel. Just look at ICE. It's now the largest police force in the world, with a budget of more than $8 billion a year and tens of thousands of agents. That's pretty wild. It's unreal. And the money doesn't appear out of nowhere. It comes from taxpayers funneled into raids, detention centers, and surveillance. Every time ICE expands, private contractors, tech companies, and security firms, they cash in large. Doesn't sound right to me. The fear of Mexicans is the sales pitch that keeps on flowing, cash flowing. Then there's the war on drugs. For decades, politicians pointed at Mexico to justify billions of anti-drug campaigns. TV ads, military equipment, border security, all wrapped into a message that Americans were the source of the US drug problem. Sounds a little toxic to me. Sounds like someone's toxic boyfriend or girlfriend, really. Meanwhile, plenty of US officials and bankers quietly made money from looking the other way. While the cartels moved north, drugs kept coming in, prisons kept filling, and budgets kept growing and growing and growing. Detention centers are another piece of this engine. Each immigrant held is worth hundreds of dollars a day. And that's government payments to private prison companies. It's a business model built on locked doors and lost freedom. Don't kid yourself. Even the politicians make money. Campaigns get donations from prison companies, border contractors, and industries that rely on cheap labor. So when leaders talk tough about Mexicans, it's not only about votes. It's about keeping the money pipeline open because it's very lucrative. It's not even about the border. It's about a machine that turns people into profit. And it's completely wrong. And Mexicans are the easiest target to squeeze for that maximum profit. Mexicans aren't hunted down because they're dangerous. They're hunted down because it's profitable. ICE gets bigger budgets. Politicians get easy votes and money. Private prisons get fast contracts. Industries get cheaper labor. And even the war on drugs gets recycled funding decade after decade after decade. Every part of the system cashes in, while Mexicans and hardworking families in the US pay the price. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I think you'll enjoy this one too. This is the 10 things that Americans do in Mexico that annoy the locals. So if you're planning on coming or you want to check this video, click on it and I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.